The woman was horrified to spot the emperor's imperial seal on the marriage contract torn apart by the beggar. She immediately realized the beggar was no ordinary person, so she promptly offered to marry him in her elder sister's a decision that left everyone stunned. As the daughter of a prince, she held a noble status, yet now, she was willing to marry a beggar, which seemed unimaginable to all. What they didn't know, however, was that this beggar was actually the reigning emperor, and this choice of hers would soon make her the most honorable empress in the realm. It all started one day earlier. Someone had poisoned the emperor's food, and the woman's father had become the prime suspect. Desperate to save his life, he hastily told the emperor that 20 years prior, he had saved the late emperor. In return, the late emperor had promised that when the current emperor came of age, he would marry one of the man's daughters. Upon hearing this, the emperor decided to spare the man. Later, he asked his servants to prepare a set of beggar's clothes, for he wanted to test whether the man's daughter had the character worthy of being an empress. Meanwhile, after learning her husband had been taken away by the emperor, the man's wife was frantic. She immediately arranged for her two daughters to hold a public betrothal ceremony. She believed that if either daughter could marry a man of high status, they could rescue her husband. However, the stepmother pinned all her hopes solely on her biological daughter. She treated her stepdaughter with great disdain, hoping only to marry her off in exchange for a large sum of betrothal gifts. Just as the two sisters were about to throw the silk ball to choose their husband, the emperor disguised as a beggar stepped forward to stop them. He stated that he had come to fulfill the late emperor's promise and marry the prince's daughter. But his shabby appearance earned him nothing but contempt from the stepmother and her biological daughter. They shouted that the marriage contract he held was a forgery. At that very moment, the prime minister's son happened to pass by. The biological daughter then deliberately threw the silk ball into his hands, showing off to the emperor and declaring that only the prime minister's son was worthy of her. Yet the marriage contract had been decreed by the late emperor. Though seething with anger, the emperor still restrained himself and asked if they intended to break this imperial promise. But the stepmother and her daughter refused to believe that the late emperor would have bestowed a marriage contract on a beggar. Through their actions, the emperor saw clearly the shallowness and greed of his biological daughter. He then tore up the marriage contract in front of everyone and made up his mind to execute her father and the entire family once he returned to the palace. Unexpectedly, the stepdaughter standing beside them noticed the imperial seal on the torn contract. She immediately offered to marry the emperor in her elder sister's place. This enraged the stepmother. If the stepdaughter married a beggar, she would get no betrothal gifts at all. She threatened to cut off all ties with the stepdaughter if she went through with the marriage. But the woman remained unwavering. She resolutely left with the beggar. No one could have imagined that this single act of hers would save the lives of her entire family. At that very moment, the stepmother was still rejoicing that her biological daughter had found a good husband, completely unaware of the disaster that had just been averted.